do? This is your brother Bishop of Bishop's Zone TV, and today, man, look, I've been seeing y'all in the comments. You know, some of y'all, accusing me of being an immigrant, a black immigrant, because of my criticisms of Tariq Nasheed's and the Yvette Carnell's and Tone Talks. So, I got a confession to make. You caught me. You really caught me. I am an immigrant. I am an immigrant. I was originally born Southside Wakanda. I'm just joking. What it do though? This is Brother Bishop. So, today's topic. Let me be a little bit more serious. Now, if you tuned in to my channel right now, you know I've been getting into a little heated back and forth between people who call themselves FBA, ADOS, B1, or whatever the fuck acronym you want to call yourself nowadays, and have accused me of being an immigrant. Now, I do have a little story to tell real quick. Let me tell you about my story or my experiences growing up as an accidental black immigrant. Now, what is an accidental black immigrant, you ask? I know, because you're like, what the hell is an accidental black immigrant? I know it. This fool is a $5 FBA. I know it. What is an accidental black immigrant? Now, right off the bat, I just want to say, I'm not trying to be no Rachel Dolezal or whatever the name is. I'm not trying to like infiltrate the black immigrant experience by calling myself an accidental black immigrant. But I'm just hear me out, alright? So y'all can understand where I'm coming from. So, I come from an area in Texas called East Texas. East Texas is the Southern South. They don't consider it Deep South because Deep South is considered like Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, but it's damn near an extension of the Deep South. And what I mean by that is, ain't no diverse black culture in East Texas. The overwhelming black culture, when I say overwhelming, I'm talking 98% of black culture is what you all would consider the FBA. Y'all would consider it ADOS FBA. It's the, like I said, it's the Southern South.
Longview also celebrated Juneteenth at the annual softball tournament and parade. Softball teams from across East Texas competed, and people lined Martin Luther King Jr. Boulevard to watch the mile-long parade. Attendees were also treated to dance teams, custom cars, and floats. The Boys and Girls Club of Gregg County used the event to raise money for a trip to Atlanta to see historically black colleges. If you'd like to donate to that effort, you can contact the Boys and Girls Club of
Say young thug gorillas, young train gorillas. Say they'll be in jail soon. They dangerous. Yeah, they dangerous. Yeah, any nigga calling himself gorilla in the train, these country boys, these ain't city niggas. They got guns. These niggas got two. Oh, these some dangerous motherfuckers. So they stay going to jail. Oh, these stay going to jail. Ain't no insurance on this motherfucker either. They got insurance. They got insurance. They got insurance on this motherfucker. You gonna keep that right there. And then we gonna do the race of the law. Oh, boy, these dangerous motherfuckers. I told y'all, man. Hey, we got the legend out here, man. You go to war with. Yeah, these the young niggas you go to war. These the niggas you want to have a civil rights movement with. Not just run her day. Instead, they gonna fight back.
100.
Say, listen, man, get this shit right here, man. Ain't no nigga in America riding around with this here in a redneck country town. Nigga, we in Klan country. Look at this shit. These niggas don't go nothing. They ain't scared of nobody. Look at that, man. Sound.
And that's where I grew up in. I grew up in a city called Longview, East Texas. Culturally, it is nothing but FBA. That's where I grew up in. And I was born in Marshall, Texas, which is 30 minutes from Longview, which is even more southern, south, culturally, than even Longview, which is already a southern city as hell. It's a down south city, you know, it's a down south region. So East Texas, if you know about Texas, you know about East Texas, you know, people kind of consider that like, even in Texas, they kind of consider that the Mississippi of Texas. You know what I mean? So, when I was growing up, I ain't gonna give my age away, you know, but you see the gray hairs and stuff. I grew up, I'm an 80s baby, 90s kid. So I grew up in that era. I grew up in the 90s as a kid. And this is what I mean when I say I grew up as an accidental immigrant. Now, in the city that I grew up in, it was even smaller. And now it's like in the 80,000s. Then it's a metropolitan area, right? So the city I grew up in, it's in the 80,000s now, right? Almost 90,000. Then it was even smaller, right? It was like in the 70,000s. In the 90s, we talking from elementary up until high school. When I was coming up in Longview, again, like I said, culturally, it is the South. It is the Southern South, as they say. Deep South Black culture. There was no sign of any other. It wasn't New York. It wasn't LA. It wasn't Houston and Dallas. There were no continental Africans, except for a very, very small few, which I'll dwell into that later. And I grew up in the midst of this very culturally southern black area in the Black Belt, as they say. I grew up in the 90s in a Pan-African household. Now at this time, commercially, pro-black and Pan-Africanism was kind of at its peak. You know, you had groups like Public Enemy, X-Clan, Poor Righteous Teachers, you know, even Pocket came on the scene. He was more militant centered with his music at that time. You had a lot of different Paris. You had a lot of different artists that were just unapologetically pro-black around this time, you know. And you had the likes of Khalid Muhammad on TV daily, Sister Soldier, Farrakhan, just all over mainstream media around this time. And so during this time period, a lot of Black America started to embrace that African culture. Now, this wasn't the first time in American history where African Americans started to embrace their African side and started to embrace a pro-black side. Of course, we know during after Martin Luther King was assassinated in the late 60s and early 70s, they had the Black Power movement, you know. But I can honestly say that wasn't that prevalent in East Texas. Now, granted, you did have some brothers and sisters who were conscious then in East Texas, and specifically in Longview, but they were not, it wasn't like a bastion of consciousness, of black consciousness. And one of the ways that I know it wasn't was because of my dad. Now, my dad was very pro-black. He was very conscious of who he was culturally. My dad, at that time, was studying 5% Nation. He was studying Nation of Islam. He was studying Pan-Africanism. He was studying all the teachings that really embraced anything outside of what they taught us in school, which was our history started during slavery, and you're a second class, third class citizen of America, and you should be subservient to white supremacy. Now, they didn't say it boldly like that, but you get the point. And so my dad You know, he taught me everything I know. At a very, very young age, I was consciously aware and culturally aware of who I was beyond an American identity, which was African. So we grew up in a Pan-African household. You know, he already understood that the public education system then was only meant to program you, at least from a historical perspective. In history, we didn't learn anything about Africa, not to the extent that we did European kingdoms, European society, civilizations. And so, every day after school, damn near every day after school, we would have to read paragraphs and books and learn about, you know, African-centered information and education. That was common in my household. We celebrated Kwanzaa. You know, we had to recite different historical figures at some points in time throughout my history of living in Longview. So I was more African-centered, even more so than a lot of older peers around that time period. Like I said, even though these groups, now again, going back to such groups as Public Enemy and X-Clan, even though they were popular, it wasn't as prevalent here in East Texas like you would have in, like I say, New York, somewhere in the East Coast. And so, with that came my dad's decision to grow locks. Now, again, I'm telling y'all, this is back in the 90s. If you wasn't born in the mid-80s and wasn't a kid in the early 90s, you don't know what the hell I'm talking about. But back in the 90s, people associated locks, dreadlocks. I don't like to call them dreadlocks, but locks. They associated locks with Jamaicans, and Jamaicans. That's all they associated locks with. Now, if you were somewhere in New York, right, or New Jersey, brothers were rocking the locks. You didn't have to be, you know, Jamaican or from the Caribbean to rock locks. And I think maybe even Florida, maybe around that time, some of the brothers who wasn't from the Caribbean wore locks. For the most part though, all across America, most brothers wasn't rocking locks. So I'm talking about this before New Orleans. New Orleans, you know, who was known as in the early 2000s, early to mid 2000s, was known as rocking locks. They wasn't rocking locks back then in New Orleans. They were rocking hot top fades with cuts in them, with soldier rags and stuff, you know. Soldieries, right? That were the Reeboks. Yeah, New Orleans was not rocking locks like that back then. You can check. There was not. Even Georgia, even Atlanta. Now you might have seen, I think maybe Gip or Goody Mob had lock, but even Atlanta then was not rocking locks heavy back then. So locks were very rare outside of New York, New Jersey, Jamaica, and possibly Florida around the time, or more so Miami. So my dad starts growing out locks. Now this is where the accidental immigrant comes into play. When my pops grew locks, a lot of people, a lot of my peers, and even my parents' peers, my mother's peers, because we wasn't one, see, originally we're not from Longview. Now we're from a city 30 minutes from Longview called Marshall. Again, it's Marshall culturally is even more southern. Even though it's all the south, but it's even more deeply southern than Longview. And our people, my mom and dad are both from Marshall. That's where they grew up in. They didn't grow up in Longview. They grew up in Marshall. And most of our family members have over 100 years of history in Marshall and Harrison County. So that's where my family roots come from. They don't come from Longview. But we moved to Longview to have better opportunities. Because at the time Marshall was stagnant, they were declining in population, and Longview was growing. It was a bigger, more progressive city at the time. So we moved to Longview. So besides the few Marshall people that chose to move to Longview too, we didn't have a lot of ties to Longview. during that time period. So again, I'm talking about when I was a young kid. So Longview is one of those cities where everybody knows somebody who knows somebody knows somebody. Everybody related to somebody, and some, not kissing cousin type, but you know, it's a lot of relations. You know what I mean? Longview is one of those cities, just like Marshall, one of those cities, just like Tyler is one of those cities. That's just how East Texas is. You know, it's an area made of small towns and small cities, and so because we didn't have those close ties, and then my dad started rocking his locks. People automatically thought we were not from America. They thought we were Jamaican, and I used to get, I'm telling you, from elementary all the way to high school, when people would first see my dad, before even hearing his accent, which is a clear East Texas accent, they thought we were Jamaican. Or they at least thought I was half Jamaican, right? Because then they see my mom, you know, as beautiful as she is, she didn't have locks. God forbid if she had locks, and they really would have thought, you know, they really would have thought she was Jamaican. So you gotta understand, man, Longview, especially in the 90s, was not very culturally conscious outside of the close proximities of Longview in East Texas. You know, if you wanted, like I said, man, it was not like that. You know, Longview, like I said, I'm not saying Longview was culturally devoid of, I'm not suggesting Longview was devoid of any culture. We have culture. We have a rich culture, but again, it's heavily centered around Deep South Black culture, right? So here it is in the 90s. My dad rocking locks. You know, my pops was rocking locks, and literally, it was my father and another brother who coincidentally looked kind of like my dad. They were the only two people in Longview that were rocking locks around that time. So every now and then, you know, I meet somebody new. They'd be like, man, you Jamaican? Now, I used to get two reactions, right? One, it would be a reaction of like fascination, because around that time, Jamaica, you know, Jamaican music was kind of popular. You know, that's when Shabba Ranks was out, you know, Cleopatra. So Jamaican music was seen as kind of like, you know, like Jamaica was kind of like the happening place, you know? And so it would be sort of a fascination, right? The other half would almost be like a kind of like curiosity, but in a kind of disrespectful way, you know what I mean? Because it's like, you from Jamaican? Your daddy got locks. Can he wash his locks? It was kind of like, you know, people perceived you differently right off the bat because they assumed that my family was Jamaican. This is why I say I was an accidental immigrant, because now that didn't stop me from developing friendships and relationships with people, because hey, even let's just say I was Jamaican. I mean, I was heavily assimilated into the black culture. Oh, because I was not an immigrant. I'm what people would consider FBA, even though I don't identify as that bullshit. But that's what I would be considered, because my roots, that's my culture. So, you know, but so I would say generally people didn't treat me any different, but you know, it would always come up like, your dad is like the only person in the city that got locks. He gotta be Jamaican. And with that came, you know, jokes, which was friendly banter, you know, jokes and whatnot. Now, even though these were jokes, I didn't take them serious. None of it hurt me because I wasn't Jamaican. So it wasn't like, oh man, I'm just, you tear me apart. Now, because some people assume my dad was Jamaican when they initially met me, you know, when you develop friendships and stuff, sometimes you make jokes and stuff. And then one of the constant jokes aimed at me was my dad being Jamaican. Now, even though my dad's not Jamaican, before y'all cut that up and try to edit it and say, see, proof in the pudding. No, this is what they would use. Say, well, he's got to be Jamaican. I'm like, no, he's from Marshall. Marshall? Nah, he's Jamaican because he got locks. So of course they would use the stereotypes of Jamaicans. I'm not gonna say it, but they would use the jokes. They would use all kind of stereotypes to clown Jamaican people because they thought, okay, well, even if your dad's not Jamaican, then that's just gonna be a running joke. Now I'm not saying this happened. This was so prevalent amongst my peers, but it popped up every now and then. You know. Now you got to think about it. Again, we talking the '90s. My dad had locks, and he was very pro-black, Pan-African conscious. So he clearly was not from America. This is how they perceived us, as like not being a Black American. But again, because I actually am Black American, it's not like they, you know, by and large treated me any differently than anybody else growing up. But every now and then, like I said, I would get those kind of jokes. I would get those comments and stuff, you know. Now, again, this led me, now because I did receive some of those types of comments, like I said, I'm not going to repeat everything because some of it was jokes, but I'm pretty sure if I was Jamaican, I would be offended by some of those jokes because, like I said, they were jokes, but they kind of meant, you know, some people kind of meant what they said about how they viewed Jamaicans in these jokes. Like I said, I didn't take offense to it because I wasn't Jamaican. I'm not finna sit here and act like, well, oh my God. I'm not like I'm finna take somebody else's burden. Like I would understand. Because I wouldn't fully understand because I'm not a Black immigrant. But I empathize with Black immigrants because of my experiences and because I was taught about Pan-Africanism at a very young age, and that's just how we were raised. Which leads me to another peer of mine who was an actual Black immigrant. He was a second generation born brother. He was one of the few continental Africans in Longview. And when I say few, I mean I can count on one hand, at least in the 90s, how many continental Africans were in Longview. And I'm not gonna put the brother's name out, you know, but I can honestly say that because of how I was raised as a Pan-Africanist, and because of how I was treated, which really wasn't that bad, but just like I said, the little comments here and there, at a very young age, I was consciously aware of how our brothers and sisters can be towards non-Black Americans. And especially continental Africans, because see, like I said, Jamaica at that time was considered kind of cool. Africa was not. Africa wasn't, I mean, Africa, again, you did have the movement, you did have the Public Enemies, you did have the X-clans, but a large percentage of Black people, see, Black people have this over-exaggeration that, oh, we were so welcoming to Africans in the 90s, da-da-da. No. Like I said, nah, that's not true. That ain't true at all. You know what I mean? Just because you saw it in hip-hop and they kind of made it cool, it was a lot of ugly attitudes towards continental Africans. Now, I know every city in America is not like Longview, but I guarantee you a large percentage of the Black population in America who didn't have access to a lot of continental Africans as such, and a lot of exposure to continental Africans outside of TV, probably felt the way that a large percentage of Black people in Longview, I'm not gonna say a large percentage, but a significant amount of Black people felt in Longview. So this leads me to a young brother who was a continental African. I can honestly say that he had a rough childhood growing up, and it was largely by FBA, African Americans. And not only because he was Nigerian, not only because of his name, which he didn't have like an American name. You know how some Black immigrants give their children American first names. He didn't have that. He had his name was straight up Nigerian, straight up. Which again, we talking in the 90s, in the middle of East Texas. You can only imagine the culture shock. And not only was he those things, but he was also very dark-skinned. Oh my God. And see, that's why I say, we gotta tell the truth. We gotta be honest. In the black community, man, we was in the 90s, man, colorism was prevalent. Colorism is still prevalent, but it was definitely prevalent just as bad. You know, we were, come on now, you remember those "your mama so black" jokes? Remember those "your mama so black" jokes? You love black people, but your mama so black. Those were prevalent. We heard those jokes. So, you mean to tell me that colorism was prevalent in the black community, but Africa, a place that wasn't considered favorable in Western media, aside from a few hip-hop acts up north, you mean to tell me that we stopped crossing line with that one, huh? That we were conscious enough to understand not to see that those are our brothers and sisters. Oh, it was just African booty scratching. That's what some FBA tell you. Oh, it was just African booty scratching. You mad at that? You mad about some shit that went on in your childhood? Don't you realize that untreated childhood trauma can creep into your adulthood? But see, it's like Chuck D said, the hate that taught hate, that's why we gangbanging. Because in America, our trauma of slavery and cultural annihilation has never been treated properly. So we just taught to just like move forward, move on. Even though a lot of brothers and sisters lash out because of white supremacy rhetoric and white supremacy actions and behavior, we haven't moved on. You know? But now you want continental Africans to just get over their childhood trauma. See, you're not telling the truth. A lot of our people are not telling the truth. This brother, it was this young brother at the time, he's a child, he got tormented, bullied so badly by our own people to the point that it drove him rebellious. I mean, he was damn near almost suicidal at some point. Again, he had no support. There was no Nigerian community that he could go to. He didn't have that. And eventually, I'm just being honest, he chose to hang with non-black Americans. Even though initially, he wanted badly to hang with black people because he saw himself, he saw us in his image. Because he saw, when he seen black people, he saw himself. He said, well, I'm black, they're black. But then you sit there and claim that Africans don't like African Americans. His parents, now, in the 90s, my dad and a couple of other his peers created a pro-black Pan-African organization in the city of Longview. And this young brother's parents were a part of that, along with another African brother who was very instrumental in helping advance the black community in Longview during that time period, you know. And some of our people in the community, they didn't necessarily jump on board with identifying with their African lineage because they didn't want to rock the boat at that time, or they couldn't identify with something that they saw less desirable or something so far away. I was able to identify with that easily because, again, I was ingrained in Pan-Africanism at a very young age. Like I said, starting in elementary, and it's been that way ever since. So, again, when it came to a real continental immigrant, he was bullied. And this is something that I hear pretty common among most continental Africans and Caribbean people here in America. Now, again, I'm not saying that all black people are like this, all black Americans are like this in this country. So I would say nowadays, probably black immigrants or black immigrant children, well, they're not really black immigrant, but because some are probably second and third generation born, probably have it better than what they had in the 90s and the 80s, you know what I mean? Because black immigrants and black American children have kind of, you know, it's assimilated now, right? You know, so black immigrant children now have assimilated more fully into black culture because they've been here longer now, and they're just, it's more exposure between the two groups, more representation in mainstream media with non-FBA folk. There's more representation in media in the dominant society between or with black immigrants. And what it really boils down to is not the fact that, oh, continental Africans don't like you. Black Caribbeans think they're better than you. Yeah, some of those sentiments do exist. Some of that is a response to how they were treated as children. Because they all got a story to tell about how they were mistreated. And if you were an actual human being with some kind of integrity and respect for humanity, you would at least have some empathy. Because I know you want people to have empathy for your plight. Don't sit here and act like you don't, because that's one of the complaints you have. Oh, Africans, they ain't rocking with us. They not trying to hear our struggle. Here you are talking about struggle, but then you call it struggle amongst them. As a child, now you were a child, I understand. But as adults, we cannot dismiss what took place when we were all children. And this ain't just childhood, this is adults too. Trust me, I've seen it at the workplace. I've seen brothers, grown ass men, throw jokes at continental Africans who are not as assimilated into American culture as other people, as other, you know, African immigrants. So, you know, don't give me that bullshit about you the victim. Black folks can victimize like a mug, you know what I'm saying? Victim Olympics, gold medal and all. You know, but hey, I know the comments. I already know the comments, man. Y'all can't fool me. I know the comments, man. Y'all don't want to hold ourselves accountable for shit, man. And that's okay. That's cool. That's cool. I'm not blaming Black America fully. I'm not acting like we the villains. I'm just being realistic because I've seen it at a very young age. I understand it. Again, I'm not trying to infiltrate Black immigrants. I'm not trying to be a trans Black immigrant or some shit like that, you know? And how that affects me now, how I view Africans globally, and I consider Black Americans Africans. How that shaped how I approach certain individuals that engage in divide tactics when there's always strength in numbers. Because if you're talking about a global white supremacy, as they like to put it out there, then don't you need a global Black family to combat that? Especially if there's more Black people, more African people globally than it is Europeans. I digress. Y'all can be petty if you want to. I'm not. Hey, just want to get my experiences. If you like, you know, like it. Subscribe. Comment down below. If you didn't like it, continue calling me a $5 FBA. Continue calling me a fake immigrant or whatever, which is fucking stupid and contradicting, because if y'all are so off-putting about Black immigrants being so proud of their culture, so proud, in fact, that they distance themselves, as y'all like to say, from Black American culture, then why would I hide the fact that I'm a Black immigrant? Why would I hide the fact that I'm a so-called Jamaican, a so-called, you know, Nigerian or whatever? Why would I hide that fact? I'm just saying though. So until next time, get at me. Holla.